The first mistake flight attendant Brenda Jenkins made was assuming the woman in seat 32B was just another problem. A problem she could manage, contain, and ultimately extinguish with the cold authority of her uniform. The second mistake was seeing a tired black woman with a wailing infant and filling in the blanks with a story of incompetence and neglect. But her final career-ending mistake was made at 35,000 feet when she picked up the in-flight phone to call security on this passenger, never once imagining she was putting a direct call into the heart of the airline's own royal family. The air in the terminal at LaGuardia was thick with the humid discontent of a New York summer and the friction of 1,000 delayed travel plans. Dr. Anaya Hayes shifted her 9-month-old son Leo from one hip to the other, his small, warm body a familiar weight against her own exhaustion. The departure board for AeroVista Flight 712 to Chicago had blinked from on time to delayed to a more ominous delayed sea agent over the course of 3 painstaking hours. Anaya, a pediatric resident on a rare weekend off, was flying coach by choice. It was a small act of rebellion, a way to cling to the anonymity she'd cherished before her life had been swallowed by the gravitational pull of her husband's legacy. Flying in the back of the plane, wrestling with a diaper bag and a fussy baby like any other mom made her feel like herself again, not Mrs. Anaya Blackwood, wife of Damien Blackwood, the enigmatic billionaire CEO of AeroVista Airlines. Damien had wanted to send the private jet, of course. It's easier, Annie, he'd insisted over the phone, his voice a smooth baritone that could calm corporate raiders, but not a wife craving normalcy. It's not about easy, Damien, she had replied, her voice firm. It's about real. Now surrounded by the cacophony of frustrated travelers, real was proving to be a challenge. Leo, usually a placid baby, was feeding off the terminal's anxious energy. His whines were escalating into full-throated cries, and Anaya could feel the familiar prickle of public judgment. She tried every trick in her arsenal, the one she'd learned in medical school, and the one she'd learned in the trenches of motherhood. A teething rusk, a soft lullaby, a game of peekaboo with her boarding pass. Nothing worked. Finally, the boarding call crackled to life. A collective sigh of relief swept through the gate. As Anaya shuffled in line with Group 4, bouncing Leo gently, she noticed her. The flight attendant stood at the aircraft door, a sentinel in a perfectly pressed navy blue uniform. Her name tag read Brenda. She had a helmet of blonde hair that looked lacquered into place and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. As passengers filed past, Brenda offered a clipped professional welcome aboard. But when Anaya approached, the smile tightened. Brenda's eyes flickered from Anaya's face down to the crying baby, then to her simple jeans and t-shirt. It was a micro-assessment, a swift and silent judgment that Anaya had felt 1,000 times before. In that split second, she was categorized. "You'll need to calm him down before takeoff, ma'am," Brenda said, her voice sharp, cutting through Leo's cries. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. "I'm doing my best," Anaya replied, her voice strained with fatigue. "He's just overtired from the delay." Brenda's lips thinned. "The cabin needs to be secure for departure." She gestured down the aisle. 32B. Anaya squeezed past knees and carry-ons, murmuring apologies. She settled into the middle seat, a fresh wave of anxiety washing over her. The man in the window seat, a businessman with a laptop already open, shot her a look of pure annoyance. The woman in the aisle seat offered a small, sympathetic smile, which Anaya gratefully returned. As the cabin doors closed with a heavy thud, sealing them all inside the pressurized tube, Leo's cries found a new frantic pitch. Anaya rocked him, her heart aching with a mixture of love and desperation. She felt a presence hovering over her and looked up to see Brenda Jenkins again. "Ma'am, I've had complaints already," Brenda said, her voice low, but carrying an unmistakable edge. "You were told at the door." "He's a baby," Anaya whispered, trying to shield Leo from the flight attendant's hostile energy. "His ears are probably hurting with the pressure change. Could I perhaps get a little bit of warm water for his bottle? It might help." Brenda stared at her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "We are in the middle of our final safety checks. I cannot run to the galley for warm water right now. You should have prepared that before boarding." The accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. You should have prepared. As if she hadn't spent the last 5 hours preparing, soothing, and anticipating every need. As if she were a novice, a careless mother. Anaya, who had literally written chapters in pediatric textbooks on infant care, felt a hot flush of anger. But she swallowed it, forcing her voice to remain even. "Of course. I'll wait," she said. Brenda gave a curt nod and moved on her posture, radiating self-satisfaction. The woman in the aisle seat, whose name tag on her bag identified her as Mrs. Gable, leaned in slightly. "Don't you mind her, dear," she whispered. "My grandson was the same. The pressure is dreadful for their little ears." Anaya gave her a weak smile, but inside a cold knot was forming in her stomach. This wasn't just about a crying baby anymore. It was about Brenda Jenkins, and Anaya had a terrible feeling that the 3-hour delay at the gate was nothing compared to the storm that was brewing inside the cabin of Flight 712. The plane ascended a powerful, roaring climb that pushed them all back into their seats. For Leo, it was a fresh hell. His cries became shrieks, high-pitched and piercing, echoing the strain of the engines. Anaya closed her eyes, murmuring into his soft hair, trying to create a bubble of calm in the chaos. She ignored the pointed sighs from the businessman by the window and the rustle of another passenger 2 rows back, turning to stare. Once they reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign pinged off, Anaya hoped for a reprieve. She flagged down a passing flight attendant, a younger man with a kind face. "Excuse me, could I possibly trouble you for some warm water now?" He smiled warmly. "Of course, not a problem at all. Let me just finish this row." But before he could take 2 steps, Brenda Jenkins materialized, seemingly from nowhere. She placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. "I'll handle this, Kevin," she said, her voice dripping with a false sweetness that didn't fool Anaya for a second. Kevin gave Anaya an apologetic shrug and continued down the aisle. Brenda turned to Anaya, her smile gone. "I am the senior flight attendant in this cabin. All requests should come through me." "I apologize," Anaya said, fighting to keep her composure. "I just saw him passing. As I asked before, I'd just like some warm water for his bottle." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "The beverage service will begin in approximately 20 minutes. You can ask for water then." 20 minutes? Anaya felt a surge of disbelief. "I'm not asking for a cocktail. It's for a crying baby. It would take you 30 seconds. Our service has a procedure, ma'am," Brenda retorted, her voice getting louder, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. "We can't have everyone making special requests outside of the designated service time. It creates chaos." The word chaos was clearly directed at Leo, who was now red-faced and gasping for breath between sobs. The businessman in 32A slammed his laptop shut with a loud clap. "Can you not do something about that child?" he snapped, not at Brenda, but directly at Anaya. Before Anaya could respond, Brenda stepped in, positioning herself as the authority figure. "Sir, I assure you I am handling the situation." She then looked down at Anaya, her gaze laced with disdain. Some people, she said, her voice just loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear, are simply not equipped to handle the responsibilities of travel. The personal nature of the attack stunned Anaya into silence. It wasn't just unprofessional, it was cruel. She felt her cheeks burn with a mixture of humiliation and fury. She was a doctor. She was a loving mother. And she was being publicly shamed by a woman who had decided based on nothing but her own prejudice that Anaya was unfit. Mrs. Gable from the aisle seat cleared her throat. "For goodness sake," she said, her voice firm. "The woman needs a little warm water. Is this airline's policy to deny comfort to an infant?" Brenda whipped her head around to face Mrs. Gable. "Ma'am, this does not concern you. Please remain seated. It concerns me when I see a mother being bullied." Mrs. Gable shot back, her chin held high. Brenda's face flushed a blotchy red. She was losing control, and she knew it. She turned her glare back to Anaya, the primary source of her frustration. "You are disrupting the entire cabin. Not just with the noise, but with this drama. The only drama here is your refusal to perform a simple, basic act of human decency," Anaya said, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. This was a mistake. Challenging Brenda's authority so directly was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Brenda leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "I have been with AeroVista for 22 years. I know a problem passenger when I see one. You're being disruptive and non-compliant. If you cannot get your child under control, I will have no choice but to take further action." Further action. For what? For having a baby? Anaya's voice rose incredulous. For failing to adhere to crew instructions and causing a disturbance? Brenda hissed. "Consider this your final warning." She spun on her heel and marched toward the front galley, her back ramrod straight. The confrontation left a toxic silence in its wake. Even Leo, exhausted by his own tantrum, had quieted to a hiccuping whimper. Anaya hugged him tightly, trying to shield him from the ugliness, but she knew the damage was done. The passengers around her were now looking at her differently, some with pity, some with annoyance, but all of them now saw her through Brenda's lens as the problem in seat 32B. Anaya felt a profound sense of isolation. She was on a plane owned by her husband, a metal tube bearing his family name, yet she had never felt more powerless. She thought about calling Damien from the airfi, but what would that solve? It would feel like admitting defeat, like running to a man to solve her problems. Her pride, already battered, wouldn't allow it. She would handle this herself. She had to. But as the flight wore on, the tension didn't dissipate. It coiled in the recycled air, a constant humming threat. Brenda Jenkins pointedly ignored Anaya during the beverage service, having the other flight attendant serve her row. She made a show of commiserating with the businessman in 32A, offering him a complimentary drink for his troubles. Every action was a calculated barb designed to isolate and punish. Anaya knew this was no longer a simple conflict. It had become a personal vendetta. The descent into Chicago began an hour later, and with it the pressure change brought on a new round of agony for Leo. His earlier cries seemed like a mere prelude to this fresh, ear-splitting symphony of pain. Anaya, having finally managed to get some lukewarm water from Kevin, the kinder flight attendant, and coax Leo into a fragile sleep, felt her spirit crumble as he awoke, screaming. She stood up, ignoring the reactivated seatbelt sign, and began pacing the narrow confines of her row, rhythmically patting Leo's back. It was the only thing that seemed to offer him a sliver of comfort. "Ma'am, sit down. The seatbelt sign is on." Brenda's voice was like a whip crack from the front of the cabin. She was already on her feet, striding towards Anaya with an expression of grim purpose. "I will in a moment," Anaya said, not looking at her, focusing solely on her son. Pacing is helping with the pressure in his ears. "We will be landing soon. I just need a minute." "You need to sit down now," Brenda insisted, her voice rising to a command. "It is a federal aviation regulation. You are endangering yourself and your child. What's endangering my child is the excruciating pain he's in." Anaya countered, her patience shredded. A pain that could have been mitigated hours ago with a simple bottle. The reference to their earlier conflict ignited the final vestiges of Brenda's professional restraint. She reached them, standing so close Anaya could smell the hairspray and the faint, bitter scent of burnt coffee on her breath. "You have been a problem since the moment you stepped on this aircraft." Brenda seethed, her voice low and menacing. "You think the rules don't apply to you? I don't know what your story is, but on my plane, everyone is expected to show a basic level of courtesy and control." She looked pointedly at Leo, then back at Anaya. "And if you can't control your own child, you have no business bringing him on a packed flight and making life miserable for everyone else." The accusation was so laden with coded prejudice, it took Anaya's breath away. "You people who can't control your children." It was a sentiment she'd seen leveled against black mothers 100 times in 100 different ways. The assumption of incompetence, of a lack of discipline, of inherent otherness. This was no longer about a crying baby. It was about Anaya's race. Brenda's animosity wasn't just about a disruption. It was about who was causing the disruption. Anaya stopped pacing and turned to face her fully. The exhaustion fell away, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. "My story," Anaya said, her voice dangerously quiet, "is that I am a mother trying to comfort her sick child. And your story is that you are a bully on a power trip who is using her uniform to harass a passenger." A gasp came from Mrs. Gable in the aisle seat. The businessman by the window was now watching with undisguised interest, his annoyance replaced by the thrill of unfolding drama. Brenda's face, a mask of fury, contorted. "Harass! You are the one who has been harassing this cabin for hours with that screaming. He is a baby, not a weapon." Anaya's voice cracked with emotion. "I am a pediatrician, for God's sake. I know what's wrong with him, and I know that what he has needed from the very beginning is a little compassion, something you are clearly incapable of." The mention of her profession seemed to momentarily stun Brenda. Her eyes flickered, a hint of uncertainty creeping in, but it was quickly replaced by renewed conviction. A black woman, a doctor, in coach. The pieces didn't fit in her narrow worldview. It had to be a lie. A desperate attempt to gain credibility. "I don't care if you claim to be the Surgeon General," Brenda spat. "You are an unruly passenger. I have given you multiple warnings. You have ignored crew instructions, stood during a sterile cockpit period, and become verbally abusive. That's it. I'm done with you." She turned away from Anaya and marched briskly to the galley. Anaya watched, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs as Brenda picked up the in-flight telephone handset. Her back was to the cabin, but Anaya could see the rigid set of her shoulders, the determined nod of her head as she spoke into the receiver. Anaya knew with a sickening certainty what was happening. Brenda wasn't calling the captain to report turbulence. She was calling the ground. She was calling for security. Mrs. Gable leaned over, her face etched with worry. "Oh, my dear," she whispered. "She can't be serious." But Anaya knew she was. Deadly serious. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot wave that washed over her from head to toe. She would be met at the gate, escorted off the plane like a criminal, in front of hundreds of people, all because her baby cried, All because this one woman, Brenda Jenkins, had looked at her and seen a threat. She sank back into her seat, pulling a sleeping Leo close to her chest. His small face was tear-stained, but peaceful now. She kissed his forehead, a single hot tear of her own splashing onto his cheek. She had tried to have one normal day. One day where she was just Anaya Hayes' mom. But the world, in the form of a flight attendant with a chip on her shoulder, had refused to allow it. The plane began its final approach, gliding silently over the lights of Chicago, and Anaya braced herself for the indignity that was waiting for her on the ground. The call itself was short, clinical, and devastatingly effective. Brenda Jenkins, tucked away in the forward galley, spoke in the clipped professional jargon she had perfected over 2 decades. AeroVista Dispatch. This is Senior Flight Attendant Jenkins on Flight 712. Approach Chicago O'Hare. Go ahead, 712, a voice crackled back. I need to report a Level 2 disturbance. I require law enforcement and airline security to meet the aircraft at Gate C12 upon arrival. There was a brief pause on the other end. A request for security wasn't routine. Confirm 712. You're requesting a police meet for a Level 2. That is affirmative, Brenda said, her voice steely. She glanced back down the aisle, her eyes locking for a second with Anaya's. There was a flicker of triumph in her gaze. Passenger in seat 32B. Female. Non-compliant with crew instructions throughout the flight. Became verbally aggressive with crew. Caused ongoing cabin-wide disturbance. Refused to be seated during final approach. I have multiple passenger witnesses. The way she framed it was a masterclass in subjective reporting. Non-compliant for trying to soothe a baby. Verbally aggressive for defending herself. Cabin-wide disturbance for a baby's cries. She painted a picture of a dangerous, unhinged woman, and the official record would now reflect that reality. Understood, 712. Security will be standing by at C12. The captain has been notified. Thank you, dispatch. Brenda hung up the phone with a decisive click. She smoothed the front of her uniform, her composure fully restored. The act of making the call had solidified her authority in her own mind. She was no longer a flustered flight attendant arguing with a difficult passenger. She was an agent of order, a defender of federal aviation regulations. As she walked back to her jump seat for landing, she deliberately avoided looking at Anaya. The battle was over. She had won. Now she just had to wait for the authorities to arrive and remove the problem. In seat 32B, a profound stillness had settled over Anaya. The anger had subsided, replaced by a cold, heavy dread. The finality of it all was suffocating. She thought about Damien. He would be waiting for her just beyond security, probably scrolling through emails on his phone, completely unaware of the public shaming his wife was about to endure. The irony was gut-wrenching. The owner of the airline was waiting to greet a woman being frog-marched off one of his own planes. Mrs. Gable reached out and placed a trembling hand on Anaya's arm. This is an outrage, she whispered, her voice filled with indignation. An absolute disgrace. I will speak to them for you. I will tell them exactly what happened. Anaya looked at the kind older woman and managed a faint smile. Thank you, she said sincerely. But I don't think it will matter. She's already written the report. In their eyes, I'm already guilty. The plane's wheels touched the runway with a gentle screech, the sound marking the end of the journey and the beginning of her nightmare. As the aircraft taxied towards the gate, an announcement came over the PA system. It was Brenda's voice, cool and impersonal. Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened until the aircraft has come to a complete stop at the gate and the captain has turned off the fasten seatbelt sign. For those of you deplaning in Chicago, We will be asking you to remain seated for a few moments after the sign is off, to allow authorities to board the aircraft and handle a security matter. We appreciate your cooperation." A murmur rippled through the cabin. Heads turned, craning to see. Who was the security threat? A terrorist? A drunk? Passengers scanned the faces of those around them, a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity in their eyes. Anaya felt the weight of hundreds of stares. She shrank into her seat, pulling the blanket higher around a blissfully sleeping Leo, wishing she could disappear. The businessman in 32A looked at her, his expression a strange cocktail of smugness and shock. He had gotten what he wanted, the noisy baby was being dealt with, but perhaps even he hadn't expected this level of official intervention. The plane docked at the gate with a soft bump. The engines spooled down their roar, fading into an eerie silence, broken only by the anxious whispers of the passengers. Anaya's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. Through the window she could see them, 2 uniformed Chicago police officers and 2 men in black suits with AeroVista Security embroidered on their jackets. They stood waiting on the jet bridge, their faces grim and impassive. They were waiting for her. Brenda Jenkins stood up, her posture erect. She walked to the front of the cabin and spoke in a low voice to the other flight attendants, who now looked at Anaya with a mixture of pity and professional distance. They were closing ranks, protecting one of their own. Anaya took a deep breath, clutching Leo so tightly he stirred in his sleep. She had 2 choices. She could break down, cry, and plead her case on the jet bridge, creating an even bigger scene. Or she could summon every last ounce of her dignity and face this injustice with the strength she knew she possessed. She chose strength. She would walk off this plane with her head held high. But she also knew she wouldn't be walking into this ambush alone. Her attempts at normalcy had failed spectacularly. Her desire to handle this herself had led to this disaster. It was time to make a call of her own. She pulled out her phone. There was one number she knew by heart, a number that could change the entire landscape of this situation in a matter of seconds. It was a number she rarely used for this kind of reason, a number that represented the life she often tried to escape. But tonight, it was her only lifeline. With trembling fingers, she found the contact and pressed call. Damien Blackwood. The cabin door hissed open, and the sterile air-conditioned chill of the jet bridge flooded the aircraft. The passengers held a collective breath. The first to board was a tall, stern-faced AeroVista security agent named Peterson. He was followed by his partner and the 2 police officers, their hands resting calmly on their belts. The presence of law enforcement immediately amplified the gravity of the situation. Brenda Jenkins met them at the threshold, her expression one of solemn duty. "Thank you for the prompt response," she said quietly. "The passenger is in seat 32B. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger down the aisle. Agent Peterson's eyes followed her gesture, landing on Anaya. He saw exactly what Brenda had described on the phone, a woman who fit the profile. He began walking down the aisle, his heavy footsteps echoing in the silent cabin. The passengers parted like the Red Sea, their faces a mixture of fear and fascination. Anaya's phone was pressed to her ear. The line was ringing. 1 ring? 2 rings. Damien always picked up on the 3rd. "Come on, Damien, pick up!" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Agent Peterson reached her row. He stopped, his large frame blocking the aisle. "Ma'am," he said, his voice deep and authoritative. "I'm Agent Peterson with AeroVista Corporate Security. I'm going to have to ask you to gather your belongings and come with me." Anaya looked up at him, her eyes pleading. "There has been a misunderstanding. We can discuss that off the aircraft, ma'am," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Right now, you need to come with me. Please." On the other end of the line, the ringing stopped. Damien's voice, smooth as silk, filled her ear. Annie. You landed. I'm just outside baggage claim. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made her weep washed over her. Damien, she said, her voice choked with emotion. I need you. Agent Peterson's patience was wearing thin. Ma'am, let's go, now. He gestured for her to stand up. Officer, please, Anaya said, holding up a hand, her focus entirely on the phone call. Damien, they're trying to remove me from the plane. The flight attendant called security on me. There was a moment of stunned silence on Damien's end. What? Who put him on the phone? His voice had changed instantly, shedding its casual warmth and taking on the icy edge of a CEO about to dissect a catastrophic failure. Anaya looked up at Agent Peterson, whose face was now a mask of irritation. My husband would like to speak with you, she said, holding out the phone. Peterson scoffed, a small, derisive sound. Ma'am, I'm not interested in speaking to your husband. My instructions are to escort you from the plane. Let's not make this more difficult. His name is Damien Blackwood, Anaya, said her voice clear and steady. The name hung in the air for a single frozen second. Agent Peterson froze. His hand, which had been gesturing impatiently, dropped to his side. His brain scrambled to process the information. Blackwood. He'd heard the name 1,000 times. In memos, in corporate addresses, on the side of the very plane he was standing in. It was the name of the man who signed his paychecks. It couldn't be. It was a bluff, a desperate last-ditch lie. But then he looked at Anaya again. He saw the expensive-looking phone, the quiet confidence that had suddenly replaced her fear, the exhaustion of a new mother, not the wildness of a disruptive passenger. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. What if it wasn't a bluff? Behind him, Brenda Jenkins stepped forward. What's the holdup, Agent? Just get her off. Hesitantly, as if the phone might burn him, Peterson took it from Anaya's hand. He held it to his ear. This is Agent Peterson, he said, his voice suddenly uncertain. He listened. His face went from skeptical to confused to utterly pale. The color drained from his cheeks, as if a plug had been pulled. The passengers in the nearby rows saw the transformation. They saw the tough, imposing security agent begin to tremble slightly. Yes, sir, Peterson stammered into the phone. Right away, sir. I understand. No, sir. Absolutely. My deepest apologies, sir. He handed the phone back to Anaya, as if it were a holy relic. He looked at her not as a problem passenger, but as if he were seeing a ghost. He turned to his partner and the police officers, his face a mess of panic and confusion. Stand down, he croaked. Everybody stand down. It's a mistake, a huge mistake. He then turned to Brenda, who was watching the scene unfold with a baffled expression. What did you do? He whispered, his voice filled with a dawning horror. What do you mean, what did I do? Brenda asked, bewildered. I followed protocol. She was unruly. Her husband is Damien Blackwood Peterson, said the words falling like stones into the silent cabin. For a moment, nobody reacted. The name didn't register with the other passengers, but it hit Brenda Jenkins like a physical blow. Her mouth fell open. Her perfectly composed face shattered into a million pieces of disbelief and terror. Damien Blackwood, the owner, the CEO, the man whose corporate portrait hung in every training facility and operations center from New York to Hong Kong. She looked from Peterson's terrified face to Anaya, who was now speaking softly into her phone. the woman in the simple jeans and t-shirt, the black mother in coach, the problem in 32B. She was the owner's wife. A collective gasp went through the cabin as the information spread in frantic whispers. Did he say Blackwood? The airline owner? Oh my God, that's his wife. The atmosphere shifted in an instant. The annoyance, the judgment, the morbid curiosity, it all evaporated, replaced by a thick, palpable cloud of shock and vicarious dread. Everyone on that plane, from the businessman in 32A to the passengers in the very last row, suddenly realized they hadn't been watching a simple passenger dispute. They had been unwitting witnesses to a career suicide. Brenda Jenkins swayed on her feet, grabbing the back of a seat for support. Her world built on 22 years of rules and regulations and perceived authority had just been leveled. The woman she had tormented, humiliated, and tried to have arrested was for all intents and purposes her boss. And she was married to the man who held Brenda's entire future in the palm of his hand. The aftermath was a blur of frantic, clumsy damage control. Agent Peterson, now sweating profusely, turned to Anaya with a level of deference that bordered on parody. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, his voice shaking, "on behalf of AeroVista I, we offer our most sincere and profound apologies. Is there anything at all we can do? Can we escort you? Carry your bag?" Anaya simply looked at him, her expression unreadable, and said, "I would like to get off this plane with my son." Of course," Peterson stammered. He turned and cleared the aisle with a newfound urgency, waving passengers back into their seats as if shooing away flies. "Please make way. Allow Mrs. Blackwood to deplane." Anaya gathered her diaper bag and settled Leo comfortably on her hip. As she stood, she looked directly at Brenda Jenkins. The flight attendant was frozen in place, her face ashen, her eyes wide with sheer terror. All the arrogance and authority had bled out of her, leaving behind a hollow shell of a woman on the verge of collapse. Their eyes met, and in that moment there was no triumph for Anaya, only a deep, profound sadness for the ugliness of it all. She said nothing. She didn't have to. She walked down the aisle, the silence of the cabin now a testament to their collective shame. Mrs. Gable gave her a supportive nod. The businessman in 32A refused to meet her gaze, staring intently at the back of the seat in front of him. As Anaya stepped onto the jet bridge, Damien was there. He had bypassed security and run to the gate, his usual impeccable suit slightly rumpled. The moment he saw her, his face, a mask of cold fury, softened with relief. He enveloped her and Leo in a hug, burying his face in her hair. "Are you okay?" he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I am now," she whispered, leaning into his strength, the adrenaline finally giving way to bone-deep exhaustion. Behind them, a flurry of activity was unfolding. The O'Hare station manager, a man named Henderson, who had been alerted by Damien's frantic call, had arrived, his face pale with panic. He was grilling Agent Peterson and his partner, his voice a low, angry buzz. Damien pulled back his eyes, scanning her face, then looking down at the sleeping Leo. His gaze then shifted to the aircraft door where Brenda Jenkins was being spoken to by the station manager. Damien's expression hardened again, the cold fury returning tenfold. "Who was it?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. Anaya just nodded tiredly towards Brenda. Damien's eyes, the color of storm clouds, locked onto the flight attendant. He took a step forward, a predator stalking his prey, but Anaya put a hand on his chest. "Not here, Damien," she said softly. "Please. I just want to go home." He hesitated, his jaw tight, then acquiesced with a sharp nod. He took the diaper bag from her shoulder. "Let's go." They walked away, leaving a tableau of chaos in their wake. A terrified flight crew, a shell-shocked security team, and a plane full of passengers who now had the story of a lifetime. The ride to their Chicago penthouse was silent. Anaya stared out the window at the city lights, the events of the day replaying in her mind. Damien drove his hands, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. The silence wasn't comfortable. It was heavy with unspoken words, with anger, guilt, and the chasm that had opened between her desire for normalcy and the reality of their life. When they finally arrived and put Leo to bed in his crib, the dam broke. "Why?" Anaya Damien's voice echoed in the cavernous living room. "Why were you in coach on a commercial flight? I told you to take the jet." Anaya spun around, her exhaustion giving way to a raw, simmering anger. "Is that what you care about? The logistics? Not what I just went through?" "Of course I care," he boomed, pacing the floor. "I was sick with worry when you called. But this never would have happened if you had just listened to me. Listened to you," she cried, her voice cracking. "So this is my fault. It's my fault that your employee is a prejudiced bully. It's my fault that she saw a black woman with a baby and decided I was garbage." The accusation hit him hard. He stopped pacing, his face stricken. "No, that's not what I mean. I want to protect you. That's all I've ever wanted to do. I don't want to be protected in a gilded cage." "Damien?" She shot back, tears welling in her eyes. "I want to be able to exist in the world. I wanted to feel normal for 5 minutes to be a mom on a plane, not the owner's wife. I am Dr. Anaya Hayes. I have an identity outside of you. But the second I try to live in it, your world slaps me back down." The raw pain in her voice silenced him. He saw it then not as a logistical failure, but as a deep, personal wound. He saw the cut that his privilege, his wealth, and his world had inflicted on the woman he loved. He walked over to her, his own anger deflating, replaced by a wave of guilt. "You're right," he said softly, pulling her into his arms. "You are absolutely right. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking about you, I was thinking about the problem, the brand, the fallout." He held her tighter. "I'm so sorry you went through that. Alone." She wept against his chest, the tears of frustration, humiliation, and fury finally flowing freely. He just held her, stroking her hair, letting her release the poison of the day. Meanwhile, back at O'Hare, Brenda Jenkins was sitting in a windowless office with station manager Henderson and a union representative who had been hastily summoned. The union rep was arguing about protocol and wrongful termination, but his words were hollow. They both knew this was beyond protocol. Brenda was numb. She kept replaying the events in her head, trying to find the moment where it all went wrong. In her mind, she had been the one in the right. She had been maintaining order. But the name Blackwood had recontextualized everything. Every action she took, every sharp word she spoke, was now cast in a horrifying new light. She hadn't been disciplining a problem passenger. She had been abusing the wife of the most powerful man in the company. The racism she would never admit to the subtle biases that guided her assumptions were now laid bare for what they were, a catastrophic liability. "They're going to fire me," she whispered to her rep when Henderson stepped out to take another call. The rep, a world-weary man named Sal, sighed. "Brenda, I'll be honest with you. Firing you is the best-case scenario right now. What you did. This is the kind of thing that ends up on the national news. They're not just thinking about you. They're thinking about the stock price on Monday morning." The reality of her situation crashed down on her. This wasn't just about her job of 22 years. This was about her reputation, her future, her life. She had picked a fight with the wrong woman not because she was the owner's wife, but because she had judged her on sight, and her judgment had been spectacularly, ruinously wrong. The next 48 hours were not just a whirlwind. They were a corporate hurricane. The story of Flight 712 had breached containment. Passengers, most notably the eloquent and indignant Mrs. Gable, had spoken to family and friends, and the narrative had leaped onto social media, where it mutated and grew with every share. By morning, it was the lead story on several influential news aggregators, framed with incendiary headlines: bias at 35,000 feet, AeroVista crew targets, black mother, and the more sensational airline owner's wife, humiliated, nearly arrested on husband's own plane. Damien Blackwood sat in his home office, a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the sprawling Chicago landscape. But he felt besieged. An emergency video conference call projected the faces of his board of directors onto a large screen. Each one a portrait of panic and pressure. "This is a 5-alarm fire." Damien barked Arthur Albright, a silver-haired titan of industry from the old school, whose investment in AeroVista was significant. The stock is projected to drop 5% at open. We need to cauterize this wound. Now. The flight attendant Brenda Jenkins must be terminated immediately. Her supervisors at O'Hare terminated. The security agents suspended pending review. We issue a statement condemning their actions, throw them under the bus, and we move on. Clean. Simple. Damien's COO, Marcus Thorne, chimed in, his expression more measured, but equally grave. "Arthur's right about the urgency, Damien. The PR team is recommending a primetime interview. You and Anaya sitting down with a reputable journalist. Show a united front, express your outrage, and control the narrative. We need to get ahead of this." Damien rubbed his temples, the pressure building behind his eyes. It was a classic corporate playbook. Identify the scapegoats, perform a public execution, and sanitize the story with a carefully managed media appearance. It was clean, simple, and utterly soulless. It treated the deep personal wound inflicted on his wife as a balance sheet problem. Putting Anaya on television to relive the most humiliating day of her life is not my first choice, Marcus, Damien said, his voice tight. "It may be our only choice to stop the bleeding," Albright countered gruffly. "This isn't about feelings, it's about shareholder value." Before Damien could retort, Anaya appeared at the door. She wasn't withdrawn anymore. In her hands was a tablet, but her demeanor was that of a surgeon about to enter the operating room, focused, determined, and radiating an intensity that commanded the room's attention. She had spent the last day and a half not just recovering, but working. She'd descended into the rabbit hole of the internet, reading not only the comments on her story, but hundreds of others. She had cross-referenced them with academic studies on implicit bias in service industries, and had even had a 2-hour call with a former professor from her university, a sociologist specializing in organizational behavior. "They're all wrong," Anaya said, walking into the room and standing beside Damien's desk. The faces on the screen turned towards her. Dr. Hayes Blackwood Marcus said respectfully, "We were just discussing the best path forward. You were discussing the fastest path." Anaya corrected him gently but firmly. "Not the best one. Firing Brenda Jenkins is what she and everyone else expects. It's an easy, hollow gesture." Albright scoffed. "Hollow. It's called accountability, young lady." Anaya met his gaze without flinching. "Mr. Albright, accountability is a system, not a scapegoat. Firing Ms. Jenkins allows AeroVista to say, 'We removed the one bad apple.' But the problem isn't the apple. It's the barrel. It's the corporate culture that allowed her bigotry to flourish, that trained her to see a passenger in distress as a threat to be managed, not a person to be helped. How many other bad apples are out there? Firing her solves my problem. It does nothing for the next woman of color who boards a flight with a tired child. She placed her tablet on the desk and swiped through a presentation she had built overnight. I don't want an interview. I want a revolution. I'm proposing a new, non-negotiable corporate mandate. We'll call it the Phoenix Initiative, because we are going to rise from the ashes of this crisis. She outlined her plan with the precision of a medical resident presenting grand rounds. It was comprehensive, data-driven, and audacious. It included mandatory immersive training workshops on empathy, cultural competency, and de-escalation for every single employee, from the baggage handlers to the board of directors. It called for the creation of a new independent civilian complaint review board within the company and the hiring of a chief diversity and inclusion officer who would report directly to the CEO. And what of the woman at the center of this? Albright challenged his skepticism clear. What if Ms. Jenkins firing her lets her off the hook? Anaya said. She becomes a victim in her own narrative, a casualty of political correctness. I don't want to end her career. I want to remake it. She will be the first enrollee in the Phoenix Initiative. Following the training, she will be demoted from her senior position and stripped of her international roots. For 1 year, she will work as a junior attendant on the busiest, most stressful short-haul commuter flights, the ones full of tired families and anxious travelers. She will be mentored and evaluated monthly. She will learn humility and empathy, or she will fail. And if she fails, then she will be terminated for an inability to perform her duties under the new standards of this company. That is true accountability. A stunned silence fell over the virtual boardroom. Damien looked at his wife, his heart swelling with a love and admiration so profound it almost hurt. She hadn't just weathered the storm, she was redirecting its power. I'll fund the initiative's first year out of my personal dividend, Damien stated, looking directly at Albright's pixelated face. And Dr. Hayes Blackwood will be its executive director. This is the new flight plan. You can either be on the plane or you can deboard now. The decision is yours. 2 days later, in a sterile meeting room at AeroVista's corporate headquarters, Anaya sat across a table from Brenda Jenkins. Brenda was a ghost of her former self. Her hair was limp, her face pale and drawn. She sat hunched, flanked by her union rep, Sal, looking at Anaya with terrified eyes. She was expecting the axe to fall. I'm not here to fire you. Brenda Anaya began, her voice calm and even. I'm here to understand. Help me understand what you saw when you looked at me in seat 32B. Brenda flinched. She stammered, I saw a passenger who was causing a disturbance. No, Anaya said, leaning forward. Be honest. What did you see? You saw a black woman you assumed couldn't afford a first-class ticket. You saw a baby you assumed I couldn't control. You wrote a story about me in your head the moment I stepped on that plane, and you spent the next 5 hours making it come true. Why? A tear traced a path down Brenda's cheek. My husband lost his job, she whispered, the confession tumbling out. We're behind on the mortgage. The pressure. I'm the lead on my routes. Everything has to be perfect. The delays, the complaints. I was at my breaking point. And your son, the crying. It was just one more thing I couldn't control. So you decided to control me, Anaya finished for her. It wasn't an excuse, but it was a crack of light into the dark motivations of the woman before her. It was the humanity twisted as it was that she had been looking for. Anaya explained the Phoenix Initiative. She explained the training, the demotion, the year of probation. She explained that it was a chance, not a punishment. A difficult, arduous chance to become someone better. By the end, Brenda was sobbing quietly. Why, she asked through her tears. Why would you do this? After what I did to you? Because my son Leo is going to grow up in this world, Anaya said, her voice softening. And I will do everything in my power to make it a world where no one ever looks at him the way you looked at me. Your rehabilitation is part of that work, if you're willing to do it. Brenda Jenkins, broken and humbled, nodded. I am. 3 months later, on a turbulent Tuesday evening flight from Chicago to Detroit, a young mother struggled to calm her crying toddler. A junior flight attendant with blonde hair and tired but kind eyes approached her. It was Brenda. She knelt in the aisle. The pressure changes are the worst, aren't they? She said with a gentle smile. Can I get him some juice? Or maybe we can find a new toy in the galley that he hasn't seen before, my treat. Watching from a jump seat at the back on an unannounced inspection was Anaya. She saw the mother's grateful relief. She saw Brenda's genuine compassion. It was a single small moment in a vast ecosystem, but it was proof of concept. Change was possible. Later that night, as she and Damien stood over Leo's crib, watching their son sleep peacefully, Damien wrapped his arms around her. I saw the report from your inspection, he said softly. You did it, Annie. You really did it. Anaya leaned back against his chest, a sense of quiet triumph settling over her. The journey had been brutal, but the destination was worth it. They hadn't just saved their company's reputation. They had started to mend its soul. And in doing so, they had rebuilt their own partnership on a foundation not of wealth or power, but of shared purpose and a profound, unwavering respect. What began as a moment of public humiliation on Flight 712 became a catalyst for profound change. Anaya Hayes Blackwood's story is a stark reminder of how quickly prejudice and abuse of power can surface even in the most unexpected places. Yet it is also a powerful testament to resilience and the choice to pursue restorative justice over simple revenge. She could have had one flight attendant fired. Instead, she chose to challenge and reform an entire corporate culture. This story asks us to consider how often do these injustices happen without a dramatic reveal. How many stories go unheard because the victim isn't married to the CEO? It forces us to look beyond the single incident and question the systems that allow them to occur. If this story of trial and transformation resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with others who appreciate real-life dramas with a powerful message. What would you have done in Anaya's situation? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more compelling stories that explore the complexities of our world.